So you could be having a conversation with your friend while walking down the street, and if both of you had a bit of spoiled garum for lunch, you could just pop into Forica, sit down and continue your conversation while having a massive case of explosive diarrhea. Anyway, moving on. Welcome everybody to this short treasure hunt where we try to find the real world historical objects on which the various buildings, objects and design in the Forgotten City are based. This is a great game and it has a ton of hidden historical information in it. I happen to be a big fan of classical history and I do reconstructions of archaeological sites in VR, so I love doing this kind of research. Okay, let's see what we can find. Number 1. Before we even start the game, we get our first recognizable historical item. The mosaic in this room is a direct copy of the 2nd century AD Triumph of Neptune. The original is in the National Museum of Tunisia. Number 2. We begin at the shrine of Proserpina, as usual. Then we turn left towards the slum area. And close to where Livia is standing, we find the Lararium, a small shrine to the Lares, the Roman house gods, which were probably related to ancestor spirits or heroes. They were usually defined as house gods, but their power could extend beyond the household. They protected roads, villages, entire neighborhoods, and even cities. This one seems to be protecting the slums, and the design looks very similar to the one found in the servants' quarters in the house of Menander, which is one of the largest villas in Pompeii. Number 3. Right next to the shrine in Aurelia's Tavern, you can find on one of the tables a dice tower. Like modern dice towers, these were used to eliminate the chance that someone could cheat by manipulating the dice throw. This one appears to be modeled after the 4th century AD copper dice tower found in Wettweiss Freudsheim. Did I pronounce this correctly? Probably not. Which is in Germany. The one on the table has on it the inscription Veni Vidi Vici, I came, I saw, I conquered, which is a famous phrase attributed to Caesar. The real dice tower has on it the inscription Pictos Victos Hostis Deleta Ludite Securi, which translates to, with the Picts defeated, the enemy has been destroyed, so play in safety. This probably refers to the 398 AD Pictish War, where General Flavius Stilicho defeated the invasion of the Picts at the north border of Roman Britain. Not sure, this is just an assumption. Number 4. Near the dice tower you can see a nice collection of most of the amphorae you can find everywhere in Forgotten City. An amphora is just a simple ceramic container with a pointed bottom and handles. Some were elaborately painted and decorated, but the vast majority were simple terracotta vessels used to transport goods around the Mediterranean. These are very characteristic samples of the transport amphora you can usually find by the hundreds or even thousands in ancient shipwrecks. They were ideal for transporting wine, grain and olive oil, so it makes sense that you would see a lot of them in taverns, kitchens, storage rooms and farm shops. Number 5. Next to where Aurelia usually stands, you can find a small amphora of Garum, the famous fermented fish sauce that was used all over the Mediterranean. The Romans loved this stuff and they used it in a ton of recipes. They even used it to flavor their wine. It was made by placing the guts of fish like anchovies or mackerel into vats and then covering them with brine and herbs like dill, coriander and fennel. The mixture was then left to ferment for a few weeks or up to a year, and then it was strained, bottled and shipped all over the empire. The small amphora we see here is based on a mosaic found in Pompeii in the villa of a guy named Aulus Umbricius Scorus, who was a famous producer of garum. The inscription on the bottle translates to the flour of garum, made of mackerel, a product of Scorus from the sop of Scorus. Number 6. In Aurelia's apartment above the tavern, we find a wall painting that seems to be inspired by the wall paintings of the villa of Fannius Sinistor. This was a villa discovered on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius and contains some of the best preserved Roman wall paintings. The paintings depict architectural elements, and their purpose was to provide the illusion of the viewer being in an outdoor cityscape instead of a small room. This is too elaborate and well made to be on the wall of an apartment in the slums, but it's here for some reason. Today the real-world paintings are in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Number 7. In the same room we have a marble bust of Minerva or Athena, the Roman and Greek goddess of wisdom. This particular sculpture appears to be the 2nd century AD Roman copy of a Greek classical piece. It was found in one of the Roman villas in Tusculum, Italy. Roman aristocrats love to keep copies of original works of Greek classical art in their villas. Again, not sure what this is doing in an apartment in the slums. Today this marble bust of Minerva is in the Glyptothek in Munich. Number 8. In the room of Horatius we have a banner of the Legio Prima Italica, the first Italian legion. It was founded by Nero in 66 AD, it had a wild boar on its banner, and it was stationed in Novai, a fort close to the border between Bulgaria and Romania. It was called Italica because most of its recruits were from Italy, and over the centuries it took part in many Roman campaigns from Scotland to Iraq. It kind of makes sense that Horatius, one of the most law-abiding characters in the game, would belong to this legion. Fun fact, there's an experimental archaeology group called Legio Prima Italica that does educational events and reenactments all over Europe. I'll put a link in the description if anybody wants to check them out. Number 9. In the same room we have another bust of Minerva, but this one is wearing a masked cavalry helmet for some reason. These were made from iron or bronze. They were heavily decorated and covered with silver or even gilded in some cases. They hung from the headpiece by a central hinge and would be fastened with straps under each ear. It is not exactly clear if these masks were worn only during cavalry exercises or if they were used during battle. They were not that thick-plated, but at the same time they could at least deflect hits from arrows and slingshot bolts. The design of this one was probably inspired by the Kalkriese face mask found at the site of the Teutoburg forest battle. Number 10. Here's a little architectural detail. At the entrance of the forum there is a triumphal arch. But this is not a standard arch, it's a tetrapylon or a quadrifrons. It has a cubic shape with a gate on each of the 4 sides. This is gate 1.
Citizen.
Hello, Rufius. This is gate 2. This is gate 3. And finally, gate 4. These arches usually mark crossroads, a central point, or some other important landmark. Not that many tetrapyla remain standing today, so I'm not sure if this is based on an existing one. The Arch of Marcus Aurelius in Libya is the closest one to this I can find. Number 11. Another detail is the use of Corinthian Order columns. The Corinthian Order is one of the 3 classical orders of architecture. The other 2 were the Ionic and the Doric. Although all 3 were used by the Romans, the Corinthian one was by far their favorite, probably because it was the most ornate. Number 12. Here on Decius market stall we have a small amphora of Silphium, a plant resin that was used as seasoning, perfume and medicine during classical antiquity. But what was Silphium? Well, it was probably a species of large fennel, but we still don't know exactly which plant it was because it's now extinct. It was always pretty rare and it had already disappeared by the time of Nero. That would explain the extremely high price Decius demands for it. The reason for its disappearance are highly debated, but it was probably a combination of over-harvesting and desertification of the area around Cyrene in North Africa, where the plant could be found. After its extinction, it was replaced by Asafoetida, a plant with similar properties that is still used as medicine and seasoning even today, mainly in India. Number 13. The loaves of bread found in Fabia's bakery and all around the Forgotten City have a very peculiar shape. This was inspired directly by carbonized loaves found still inside the oven in Herculaneum, one of the cities destroyed by the 79 AD eruption of Vesuvius. They are round, segmented into 8 pieces with a hole in the center. They also had a stamped mark on the crust, and each bread had a rope tied around its waist. They were made with common wheat and probably included parsley and seeds like poppy, sesame, fennel, and anise. There have been several attempts to reproduce the bread recipe. I have included in the description the link to Tasting History's attempt. Number 14. Right next to the bread loaves inside Fabia's bakery there is a stone grain mill. Several stone mills like this one were found in the ruins of a bakery in Pompeii. These mills were rotated by donkeys, so I'm not sure what this one is doing inside the shop, since it's probably too heavy to be efficiently rotated with the use of human power. Vertical water mills also existed before 70 BC, and there is running water everywhere, but for whatever reason Fabia has this one. Number 15. And here we have a very typical Roman theatre. The Roman theatre more or less followed the structure of the Greek one. There were some minor differences, like the elaborate stage background and the fact that the Romans didn't have to rely on acoustically perfect hillsides to construct them. The use of brick and concrete provided much easier and faster construction methods that allowed them to support enormous elevated seating areas. Roman theatres, like the Greek ones, were used for plays, music, events, and orations. It wouldn't be out of the question to have an election here. Forgotten Cities Theatre has the typical semicircular seating area or cavea, the orchestra where the chorus would perform, and the pulpitum, the actual stage where the actors performed. The most impressive part is the stage background or skene frons, which was designed to resemble a temple or a palace. This theatre looks a bit like the one in Mérida, Spain. Number 16. Here's another small architectural detail. Before the entrance to the public baths, we get this very decorated vaulted semi-underground pathway. This to me looks like a Cryptoporticus. These usually function as support structures for some other structure above them. But there are several examples of Cryptoportici that function just as a covered gallery that provided shade to the people walking underneath it. So this can probably be considered a Cryptoporticus. Number 17. Most of the historical elements of the Forgotten City tend to be relatively accurate. But there is an example here where historical accuracy is kind of thrown out of the window. I mean, the public baths are not used that much, and making an accurate Roman public bath would probably add too much unused space in the game. So it makes sense that the game has a far more simplified version. Basically, the Forgotten City public baths are a couple of corridors and an underground swimming pool. The swimming pool looks a bit like a roofed version of the Great Pool of the Roman baths in Bath, UK, but that's about it. Normally, even a small Roman public bath complex, or balnea, had several heated and cold rooms. Here is an example of a very basic balnea. The red arrow shows the entrance. The large imperial baths, or thermae, were absolutely massive and could have thousands of people visiting them every day. These are the plans of the baths of Caracalla in Rome, just to give you an idea. Number 18. This is probably my favorite type of ancient structure, the Roman public toilets or foricae. And this is exactly what they looked like. The seats were just a hole with an opening on the side that allowed people to clean themselves with a tool called a tersorium. This was essentially a stick with a sponge stuck on it. These sticks were usually placed in a bucket filled with vinegar. Right underneath the seats you had a continuous stream of water that washed away the waste. On the floor you had the second open stream of water running. This was used to dip and clean the tersorium. The best part of all this is the fact that there were no separators. People just sat on the seats right next to each other. So you could be having a conversation with your friend while walking down the street, and if both of you had a bit of spoiled garum for lunch, you could just pop into Forica, sit down and continue your conversation while having a massive case of explosive diarrhea. Anyway, moving on. Number 19. In the house of Magistrate Sentius, we can see several mosaics on the floor. 3 of them are direct copies of existing Roman mosaics. The first is in the area where we can usually find Sentia. This is a direct copy of a mosaic showing Dionysus with a panther. The original mosaic is in the Domus of Dionysus, which is part of the Domus del Ortaglia building complex, found in the Santa Giulia Museum in Brescia, Italy. Number 20. The other 2 mosaics are in the area right next to where Sentia is. This one depicts Orpheus and the animals. The original dates from 150 to 200 AD and also shows the 4 seasons on each of its corners. It was discovered in Saint-Romain and Gall, France, and today you can find it in the J. Paul Getty Museum in Los Angeles. Number 21. Right next to it is a mosaic of a bowl filled with fruit from between 350 and 375 AD. It is part of a larger mosaic set piece showing various types of food. Today it can be found in the Vatican Museums in Rome. Number 22. In the house of Ecotia, we have another wall painting that seems to have been inspired by a real wall painting. This tree looks very similar to the ones from the painted garden fresco in the villa of Livia, the villa that probably belonged to Livia Drusilla, the wife of Emperor Augustus. Like the one in Aurelia's apartment, this wall painting aims to give the illusion that the room expanded to a large garden area. The real wall painting is now at the Museo Nazionale Romano in Rome. Number 23. The house of Malleolus has the structure of a typical Roman domus, which was the home of an upper-class family. It was also the place where the paterfamilias had his office and conducted his business. The central area of the domus was the atrium. It had an open roof, and in the middle of the floor you would usually find a small draining pool that collected rainwater for use when running water wasn't available. Almost every other room in the building would be around the atrium. The most important of these rooms would be the triclinium, which translates to 3 couch room. This is where the family would have their meals. Here we have 4 couches. Also, the reason you don't see any dining tables is because the tables were portable and were removed from the triclinium after the meal. The storage rooms, the bedrooms, and the kitchen would also be around the atrium. Somewhere around here you would also expect to find the tablinium or office of the paterfamilias. It could be a separate room like in this case, or it could be a corner of the atrium. In the back of the building you would usually find a peristyle garden, which, unlike the atrium, was not a social space and was accessible only to the family. Number 24. The stone line is right next to where you find Malleolus. There are 2 identical stone lion statues right next to each other. These are direct copies of a 4th century BC Greek lion statue from a funerary monument. Since this is a villa of an aristocrat, it wouldn't be unusual to find here many pieces of art from classical Greece. But would the Romans nick a statue from a Greek grave and use it to decorate their home? Not sure, but like the bust of Minerva, they would definitely make copies out of it. They did that a lot. The actual statue is in the National Archaeological Museum of Athens in Greece. Number 25. Here's another example of Greek art. This is a direct copy of the Dipylon Amphora, a Greek geometric style amphora from the 8th century BC that marked the grave of an aristocrat. The central part of the amphora shows a funeral procession. Again, would the Romans nick an 8th century BC funerary amphora from a Greek grave? I would probably say no in this case. The Romans were fascinated by classical Greek art, but I don't think they would be interested in something as old as this. In any case, the original amphora is in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Number 26. Right next to the funerary amphora is another 8th century geometric style amphora. This one is a copy of a terracotta crater from Cyprus, and it's not part of a funerary monument. But again, this doesn't look like something a Roman would use to decorate his domus. The original is in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. Number 27. On the first floor we have another Greek piece of art. This is a bust of the god Ares, or as the Romans would call him, Mars. This statue is based on a 2nd century AD Roman copy of a long-lost 420 BC original attributed to Alcmenes, the sculptor of the pediments of the Temple of Zeus in Olympia. This would definitely be something you would find decorating a Roman domus. The real-world sculpture is in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, Russia. Number 28. And now for something completely different. Talking to the denizens of the Forgotten City, you will hear the name of Sisyphus mentioned a few times. Well, there he is, kind of. More accurately, this is a representation of the Greek myth of Sisyphus. He had a reputation of being a very smart and cunning guy. He was so smart that he managed to escape the underworld and return to the world of the living twice. But the 3rd time he died, Zeus decided to make an example of him. So his punishment was to push a massive rock to the top of a hill. But at the last minute, just before he reached the top, the boulder rolled back downhill. I guess this just symbolizes the player's endless repeating of the game cycle until the main puzzle is solved. Number 29. Right next to Equatia's house, there is a door to the lower cistern. Roman cisterns usually stored water brought into the city by aqueducts, but in some cases were just reservoirs of rainwater. The Roman city most famous for its cisterns was Constantinople, the capital of the Eastern Roman Empire. Because of the lack of natural sources of water in the surrounding area, Constantinople had to rely on its numerous underground cisterns to survive periods of drought or sieges. The Forgotten City cistern seems to have been inspired by the Basilica cistern in Constantinople, which could hold up to 80,000 cubic meters of water, which is more water than the 20 inhabitants of the city would ever need. Number 30. Right next to the door to the cistern we can see our grumpy friend Domitius, the Gladiator.
So you survived the cistern. Couldn't stay away, huh, lovely? Whatever. Just remember, I'll be watching.
But what type of gladiator is he? Well, obviously he's not wearing all his equipment, but he does have his helmet, a small piece of armor covering his chest and back, some leather padding covering his right arm, and a wide leather belt. Based on this information, my guess is that Domitius is a secutor, a chaser. The secutor helmet has a very characteristic rounded top, so as to not get caught in the net of Retiarius, a netman, which was the main opponent of the secutor during arena fights. Number 31. And for the last historical element, we have the Forgotten City's Aqueduct. These structures, together with arenas and arches, are the ones that more often come to mind when thinking about Roman architecture. Everywhere Romans went, these things would eventually appear. They supplied water for public baths, fountains, private homes, and even more mundane things like agriculture and mining. They could transport water over enormous distances. The aqueduct of Carthage was 132 kilometers long, and Rome itself had the Aqua Marcia, which moved water to Rome from the Anio Valley 91 kilometers away. Rome had a total of 11 of these things, capable of supplying at least 1,127 cubic meters of water per day. Aqua Virgo, whose tunnel is full of running water you can see in the image above, is still functioning today and brings water to the Trevi fountain and the fountains of Piazza del Popolo. To be honest, I'm not sure if you need an aqueduct to provide water to a city with a population of 20 people, but, well, there it is. Its design is probably based on one of the best preserved bridged Roman aqueducts, the Pont du Gard in Nîmes, France. Thank you for watching. I hope you had fun and learned some stuff on the way. If you think there are some other games out there that contain interesting historical elements, please leave a comment so I can take a look and see what I can find. Also, please subscribe to my channel and check out my archaeological reconstructions in VR project. I put the links on the screen. And for now, Ave atque vale.